He was counted out more times than anyone can remember. Written off, laughed at, left standing in the ashes of tragedy again and again. And yet somehow, Joe Biden kept coming back. From a shy boy with a stutter to the 46th President of the United States, his journey isn't polished or perfect. It's raw, messy, painfully human. Before we dive in, if you love real stories that feel like movies, that make you feel every triumph and heartbreak, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what you're about to hear will make you believe that endurance can outlast destiny. Now, let's begin where all legends start, with an ordinary boy who refused to stay ordinary. Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. was born in Scranton, Pennsylvania, in 1942, a working-class kid in a small, struggling city. His father, Joe Sr., sold used cars and fought to keep food on the table. His mother, Catherine, fierce, Irish, unshakable, told her kids never to let anyone make them feel small.
But Joe did feel small. He stuttered so badly that classmates mocked him mercilessly. He'd memorize paragraphs and recite them in front of the mirror, practicing for hours until he could finally get the words out. And here's our first hidden gem. Young Joe Biden practiced speaking by reading poetry aloud in front of a mirror, especially the works of Yeats and Emerson. It wasn't just speech practice, it was resilience training. By high school, that stuttering boy had become a confident athlete, captain of the football team, known for his grit. He went on to the University of Delaware, then Syracuse Law School. Nothing came easily, but everything he touched, he fought for. He used to say, "Failure at some point in life is inevitable. Giving up is unforgivable." And that would become the rhythm of his life. At just 29, Joe Biden did the impossible. He ran for the U.S. Senate from Delaware, a tiny state where hardly anyone thought a kid like him could win. He was up against a political giant. He had almost no money, but he had energy, empathy, and relentless optimism. And in 1972, he won, one of the youngest senators in American history.
But only weeks later, victory turned into unthinkable tragedy. His wife, Nelia, and baby daughter, Naomi, were killed in a car accident. His two young sons, Bo and Hunter, were critically injured. The world shattered overnight. He was ready to quit politics forever. He said, "Delaware can always get another senator. My boys can't get another father." But something or someone pulled him back. Every day, he'd take the train from Wilmington to Washington, spending hours commuting just to tuck his sons in at night. He did it for decades. And here's the second hidden gem. Joe Biden's daily train rides earned him the nickname Amtrak Joe. By 2021, he had traveled more than 2 million miles on Amtrak. Those quiet train rides, looking out the window at sunrise and sunset, became his meditation, his therapy, his way of holding on.
Slowly, he rebuilt. He poured his grief into service, championing civil rights, crime reform, and working-class issues. People in Washington began to notice his warmth, his humanity. He remembered names, birthdays, losses. He'd call strangers who'd written to him about losing a loved one because he knew that pain firsthand. Then, in 1977, light returned to his life. He met a teacher named Jill Jacobs, kind, smart, grounded. They married 2 years later and together raised a blended family with love at its center. Jill became his rock and would later become America's First Lady. The 1980s brought ambition and mistakes. Biden ran for president in 1988. He was young, bold, and sure it was his time. But soon came controversy, accusations of plagiarism, missteps on the campaign trail. His dream collapsed overnight. Then, out of nowhere, a brain aneurysm nearly killed him. 2 surgeries, months in the hospital. He stared death in the face twice and lived to tell it.
That's hidden gem number 3. Biden was given less than a 50% chance of surviving his second aneurysm surgery, but he recovered fully and returned to the Senate within months. When he finally stood again, he promised himself never to take another day for granted. Through the 1990s and early 2000s, Joe Biden became one of the Senate's most influential figures, chairing committees on foreign policy and justice, shaping laws that would define a generation. But what defined him most wasn't power, it was perseverance. He was known for crossing the aisle, reaching out to rivals, searching for the common good. Not because it was easy, but because he believed democracy depended on it. He once said, "We don't have to see each other as enemies, we just need to see each other as humans." Then came another storm. In 2015, tragedy struck again. His eldest son, Beau Biden, a decorated soldier, Attorney General of Delaware, and his father's pride, died from brain cancer at just 46. For Joe, it was a wound that would never fully heal. He said, "Beau was me, only better." He withdrew from the spotlight, too broken to run for president in 2016. But Beau's final words to him, "Promise me, Dad, give them hope," would echo in his heart for years. That's hidden gem number 4. Beau Biden's last conversation with his father inspired Joe's 2017 memoir, Promise Me, Dad, which became a #1 New York Times bestseller. When 2020 arrived, America was in turmoil, division, fear, a pandemic. And once again, Joe Biden stood up, this time not for ambition, but for duty. He entered the race at 77 years old, older than any major candidate in history. People doubted him, called him too old, too tired, too late. But remember, Joe Biden had been underestimated his whole life. He campaigned not with fire, but with empathy, not promises of perfection, but of unity. And in 2020, he became the 46th President of the United States, the oldest person ever elected to the office. Hidden gem number 5. At the exact age of 78 days and 61 years, Joe Biden became the oldest sworn-in U.S. president, a record still standing. But victory didn't bring ease. It brought one of the hardest presidencies in modern history. A nation divided, a pandemic raging, global uncertainty everywhere. And yet Joe Biden went back to what he knew best: compassion. He spent hours comforting families of soldiers, hugging survivors, calling people who'd lost loved ones to COVID. Because for him, leadership isn't about speeches. It's about showing up. Joe Biden's story isn't a tale of perfection. It's the saga of persistence. A man who's fallen, buried loved ones, been humiliated, been dismissed, and still chose to rise again and again. He's living proof that strength isn't the absence of pain. It's the courage to keep going through it.
And even now, after half a century in public service, his eyes still look forward, toward healing, toward progress, toward the belief that America, like him, can always come back. So if you've ever been told you're too late, too broken, or too small, remember Joe Biden, the boy who stuttered, the man who cried on train rides, the leader who never stopped believing in second chances. His life whispers a simple truth. You can lose everything and still find purpose. If this story inspired you, if it made you believe that perseverance can rewrite destiny, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe for part 2. Because the next chapter dives even deeper into the challenges, the controversies, and the quiet victories of Joe Biden's presidency, and what his journey tells us about resilience in a divided world. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over.
The applause had faded. The flags had been folded, and the weight of the world was suddenly on his shoulders. January 20th, 2021. Joe Biden placed his hand on the family Bible, the same one used in every oath he'd ever taken, and became the 46th President of the United States. The crowd was smaller than usual, not because of choice, but because the world was frozen by fear. A global pandemic, a nation divided, and the shadow of chaos still fresh from the Capitol riots just 2 weeks earlier. The world was watching, wondering, could this 78-year-old man really bring a wounded country back together? And quietly, Joe whispered to himself, "I've been through worse." He began his presidency with one word on repeat: unity. He didn't promise perfection, he promised decency. And that alone was enough to make millions exhale.
But rebuilding trust after so much division? That wasn't going to be easy. The challenges lined up like storms on the horizon. COVID-19, inflation, climate change, foreign threats, political polarization. Every direction he turned, there was fire to put out. Yet, somehow, he kept walking through it. He often said, "We're in a battle for the soul of this nation." And every decision he made, every law he signed, carried the weight of that belief. In his first months, he focused on fighting the pandemic. Vaccines rolled out faster than any in American history. Relief checks landed in bank accounts across the country. Schools reopened. Jobs returned. But with every victory came criticism. Every step forward, a new debate. Still, Joe kept his rhythm. Slow, steady, unflashy. The kind of leader who doesn't shout for attention, but listens for understanding. He said, "Don't tell me what you value. Show me your budget, and I'll tell you what you value." And he did just that, pouring billions into infrastructure, clean energy, and working families. Hidden gem number 1. Joe Biden's 2021 Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act became one of the largest infrastructure packages in U.S. history, over $1.2 trillion. But the presidency isn't a fairy tale. It's a war of endurance. And Joe Biden's tenure was tested, brutally. From Afghanistan to inflation, from immigration battles to political gridlock, every move became a headline, every decision a storm. The withdrawal from Afghanistan was one of his hardest chapters. After 20 decades of war, he ordered U.S. troops home. It was messy, painful, and deeply controversial. Images of chaos flooded the world, and criticism came from every direction. But Biden stood firm. He said, "I was not going to send another generation of Americans to fight a war that should have ended long ago." Behind the calm voice was a man who had attended too many military funerals, written too many condolence letters, seen too many sons who would never come home.
He didn't see numbers. He saw faces. Through it all, Biden's approval rose and fell like tides. But one thing remained constant: his empathy. He met families who'd lost loved ones to COVID and cried with them. He visited disaster zones and hugged survivors. He listened, really listened. Because for Joe, politics has never been about power. It's been about people. And that, maybe, is why he's both loved and criticized in equal measure. Too emotional for some, too old-fashioned for others, but undeniably human. Hidden gem number 2. Joe Biden is the only U.S. president to have personally called hundreds of grieving families during the pandemic, often spending 30 minutes or more on each call.
Then came a global shock. Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. The world trembled as war returned to Europe. But Joe Biden, calm, deliberate, led the charge to unite NATO. He imposed massive sanctions, rallied allies, and stood shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine's people. He declared, "Freedom will always triumph over tyranny." And his quiet determination restored an old image of America, not just as a superpower, but as a partner in defense of democracy. Hidden gem number 3. When Biden secretly visited Kyiv in 2023, under heavy security and air raid sirens, he became the first U.S. president in modern history to enter an active war zone without U.S. military control. The message was clear. The world may doubt America's unity, but not its courage. But while Biden fought abroad, he was also fighting at home. Fighting rising prices, fighting misinformation, fighting the endless noise of politics. And through it all, he kept saying the same thing: "I'm still an optimist."
That optimism, some call it stubbornness, became his compass. Because he'd already lived through worse than bad polls or political attacks. He'd buried his wife, his daughter, his son, and still found purpose. He once said, "I've been knocked down a lot, but I've never stayed down." And that, in a way, has become the story of his presidency. Beyond politics, Joe Biden's personal habits are a story in themselves. He's a creature of routine. He prays every day. He calls his grandkids constantly. And yes, he still eats ice cream like a kid at a summer fair. That's hidden gem number 4. Joe Biden is such a fan of ice cream that the White House staff jokingly calls it his second religion. He even keeps a dedicated freezer for it. And maybe that's what people love about him. He's not trying to be larger than life. He's just trying to live it, fully. As the years passed, the whispers grew louder. Is he too old? Too tired? Too slow for the job? But behind those questions stood a deeper truth. Experience is not the same as age. And few people alive have seen more, lost more, and learned more than Joe Biden. He once said, "Don't compare me to the Almighty. Compare me to the alternative." It was classic Joe, humble, funny, and real. Because beneath the politics lies a man shaped by heartbreak and hope in equal measure. A man who believes that empathy is not weakness, but leadership. And as America looks toward the future, Joe Biden looks at the next generation, the ones who will carry the torch. He often says, "The future belongs to the young. My job is to help them believe in it again." Hidden gem number 5. In his first 2 years, Biden appointed more women and people of color to federal courts than any president in U.S. history. For him, progress isn't just policies, it's people. Every new face in power is a piece of the dream he's carried since Scranton. Today, Joe Biden's story is still unfolding. He's no stranger to doubt, no stranger to loss, and no stranger to the grind of rebuilding from ashes. But maybe that's what makes him stand out. In a world that celebrates perfection, he embodies perseverance.
The stuttering boy, the grieving father, the survivor, the president. His life is proof that endurance is a superpower and compassion a weapon of change. So if you ever feel like you're too late, too tired, or too broken to make a difference, remember Joe Biden. He's walked through storms that would crush most people and still smiles when he talks about hope. Because he knows the world doesn't need flawless leaders, it needs human ones. If this story inspired you, if it made you believe that compassion can be strength, then make sure to like this video, share it with someone who needs a reminder to keep going, and hit subscribe for more cinematic stories like this one. Because Joe Biden's life isn't just history, it's a lesson in resilience. That even when the world counts you out, you can still rise and lead it.